One of the most complicated, intricate, analyzed, and scrutinized pieces of media in all of Japan has probably got to be the boys' love genre. Even calling it a genre almost seems too light, given there are dozens of subgenres, both sexual and asexual, entire publishing companies, websites, businesses, devout and voracious fandoms that spend their days searching for new content, academic papers and books. It's a lot. It's a lifestyle for some, the defining genre by which their love of whatever media they consume rotates. No matter what I say in this video, there will be just as many people that disagree with me as agree with me. And I'm in a unique position. As a trans woman that has spent time in Japan, worked in Japan, and is still deeply immersed in all things Japan, I've seen this genre explode in popularity over the last decade and a half. Seeing queer media like boys' love and girls' love expand to reach mainstream attention and appeal has been great, but with any successful form of media, genuine criticism has developed over the years that we can't just ignore. As easy as it would be to sweep things under the rug in the name of change, it would be a disservice to queer media not to bring up the bad with the good. Knowing the weight a discussion like this holds and just how much can go into it, I want to dive into the history of boys' love, how it's grown over the last 50 years, if it can help shape the future of queer relationships in Japan, the problematic aspects of the genre, and what all of this means for the future. As a heads up, this probably won't be as comprehensive as some fans of the genre might hope. I'm putting the same amount of time, research, funding, and effort into this as I do every single other essay, but you could easily spend 2 to 3 hours, if not more, talking about and dissecting any and everything that the genre has ever done. And some have done a much better job than I ever will. I'll be sure to not only link my sources down below, but also link some other materials if you want to dive deeper than what I can offer today. With all that said, let's dive into the history. Before jumping into the manga side of things, we should first take a look at how homosexuality is viewed in Japan as a whole. Like most non-Abrahamic religion-based cultures, homosexuality through most of Japan's history was viewed with a sort of shrug up until the late 1800s. Neither Shintoism nor Buddhism had any direct condemnation, so most seemed generally fine with it. Going through poetry and literature dating all the way back to the 1400s, you'd hear terms like woman hater, he who enjoys the company of men, or the more blunt, he who laid with men, used with enough regularity to not consider it an outlier. If you dug deeper, you'll see that while the male-female relationship was deemed most lucrative due to its childbearing potential, most people were fairly fluid with their sexuality at the time, with male kabuki prostitution being a huge draw to anyone looking for fun in the real-life entertainment district. One common practice observed by both Buddhist monks and samurai for hundreds of years that tied into all of this was that of pedestry, or the act of an older man taking a teenage boy under his wing until he reaches adulthood, with sexual intercourse sometimes being a part of it. While frowned upon now in most cultures, it was something that was deeply important to both cultures and had significant weight behind it, especially in the 1700s and 1800s. While it was usually more of an altar boy type situation with the monks, where things could happen but was situationally dependent, with the samurai it went a whole lot deeper and became a sticking point when laws started to come into play. Pedestry in samurai culture was often referred to as wakushudo, normally shortened to shudo, and with it came a lot of responsibilities. The chigo, otherwise known as the young apprentice, would swear their life to the ninja, or old master, and it would be a partnership viewed with the same reverence, that of marriage. The ninja would teach the Shigo the ways of the samurai, how to fight, how to act, how to conduct and carry themselves in any situation, and in return the Chigo would give themselves sexually to the ninja until they came of age. even after the arrangement was complete, most would often still be incredibly close, whether sexually or just as lifelong friends, and oftentimes the Chigo, when they got older, would then take on the role of the ninja, and the cycle would continue. Obviously, through modern eyes, we can see the issues with this, but much like the Greeks and Romans, this was often viewed as an important coming of age for teenage boys at the time. The reason I bring this all up, though, is that Shudo was a very important act to a lot of people leading into the start of the Meiji era. So there was quite a lot of pushback initially when, at the pressure of Western influences like sexology and the Ming Dynasty in China, in 1872 they banned homosexual sodomy, effectively ending Shudo and pushing gay relationships out of the light of day and into the shadows, with sometimes dire consequences. The Western reasoning behind the ban was that continued intercourse between two men would lead to one of the men turning into a woman over time, thus causing the collapse of society. If it were that easy to become a woman, it would have saved me a lot of time, effort, and money, but I apparently wasn't alone in this thinking, as 8 years later it was overturned. But why bring this all up? Well, despite the law being overturned and no law existing against homosexuality, it's been a point of contention in Japanese law, culture, and society for 142 years and counting. And while I'll get to modern times later on, let's just say that had boys' love not taken off the way it had, the country would be much worse off in regards to gay rights. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Back to the manga side of things. Though her career wasn't as long or prolific, Mizuno Hideko's Fire is often credited as one of the first manga series to feature gay characters, as well as the first manga to feature sexually explicit scenes or a male protagonist in a shoujo series. For a series that only ran for 4 volumes over a couple of years, it definitely left a mark. Though she only wrote 2 more series after the fact, Mizuno did leave an impression that would then lead towards the Year 24 group, which created the Shonen Ai genre, better known today as boys' love. If you didn't watch my in-depth look at how shoujo shaped isekai into the massive genre it is today, I'll leave a link for that down below as I went more into detail on the Year 24 group there. But as a Cliff Notes version, the Year 24 group, named after the 24th year of the Showa era in Japan, aka 1949 representing the year most of the authors were born, is a collective of female manga artists that all gathered together in the early 70s, mostly under one roof, as they worked to change the way shoujo manga was looked at and received in Japan. Though female artists were starting to be brought in during the 50s and rose to prominence in the 60s thanks to the creation and publishing of shoujo-dedicated magazines, a lot of it was still being edited and overseen by men. Not only that, but most shoujo fell into 3 categories at the time: romance, horror, or the new hot commodity of the romantic comedy. See my last video for more on that one. With the Year 24 group, they started branching out into more unique and diverse routes, tackling darker subjects or genres that hadn't yet been covered in great detail. For the sake of this video, since I doubt this will be the last time this time period is brought up, one of the defining characteristics that started to develop was that of the Bishonen protagonist. Beautiful, androgynous, sometimes gender fluid, but mostly homosocial men that could be fawned over by women across Japan. Pretty soft boys became a defining factor in shoujo during this time, but 2 books helped propel the boys' love genre into popular culture. The Sunroom in 1970, that 6 years later would go on to become the Song of Wind and Trees that would then run for another 8 years after the fact, and the November Gymnasium. Also during this time, Barazoko, a gay men's magazine born out of fetish magazines in the 1960s, but focused primarily on large, hypermasculine, burly gay men, also released around this time and helped influence some of the designs that the Year 24 authors like Moto Hagio would then use going forward, along with some of their stories and experiences that they themselves could not use. In tandem with the Bishonen boys' love stories in shoujo magazines like The Poe Clan and Heart of Thomas, and gay men's magazines released throughout the 70s like Aidon and Sabu, the boys' love genre was really starting to take off in the 70s. Heck, at one point, both June, a Bishonen manga magazine, and Bisatsu, which featured some of those aforementioned stories, were selling 1 million copies an issue. That said, things started to take a dip once the genre entered the 80s. Though there's no concrete evidence as to why these series started to wane in popularity, with theories ranging from increased popularity in traditional shoujo and shonen manga to a decrease in general interest once the initial thrill wore off, one defining factor that either hurt or helped, depending on who you asked, was the rise of the doujinshi. Born out of an increased usage, technological advances, and popularity of the copy machine, doujinshi are self-published works that are usually made as a parody of an already existing property. One of the most popular of these, and what some credit as both the rise and fall of traditional boys' love media at the time, was yaoi. Yaoi was short for Yamanashi Ochinashi Iminashi, or no climax, no plot, no meaning. Other interpretations of the term popped up as the years went on, but this original meaning was the one used most whenever you talk to people in doujinshi circles. People flock to creating their own doujinshi based on other popular works, like Captain Tsubasa, and with the rise of Comic, a doujinshi-focused convention, the rise of yaoi started to take off. That said, it wasn't all doom and gloom for traditional shonen-ai. Series like Banana Fish and Tomoe were released, and the first anime OVAs, like the aforementioned Song of Wind and Trees and Earthian, were released as well, alongside drama CDs and light novel adaptations. Though not taking off in the same way as yaoi, the medium was far from dead, just in a sort of lull after the initial boom. It was in the 90s when things started to pick up even more, though it was also around this time that controversy began popping up as well. With yaoi growing in popularity, businesses and companies started to see dollar signs, so they began publishing these doujinshi in their own magazines, before eventually giving their own dedicated magazines for people to enjoy. 30 magazines in total were started in a 5-year period during the beginning of the 90s, with magazine BX Boy being the largest and turning yaoi into a full-fledged powerhouse in the industry. While Bishonen and Shonen-ai elements were still being used, more realistic settings, stories of tragedy and loss, became more prevalent, and the idea of fate, of finding your one true soulmate through the darkest of times and tragedy, became the ongoing draw of these series. Series like Gravitation, Zetsuai 1989, and its spin-off, Bronze Zetsuai since 1989, along series like Banana Fish, which were wrapping up by the mid-90s, used these elements and brought in a wave of new readers. Even groups that once started as yaoi creators, like the manga group Clamp, started to find success during this decade and going into the 2000s, including elements of their yaoi doujinshi in their own writings, like RG Veda, Tokyo Babylon, and even Cardcaptor Sakura, ultimately introducing Western audiences to some of these themes that would then send them down a rabbit hole looking for similar books with similar elements. This, alongside message boards and word of mouth, led to Western audiences discovering yaoi, reading it, buying it, and even importing merch and starting their own convention YaoiCon in 2001. This, alongside steady readership in Japan, helped dedicated yaoi magazines, stores, and companies dedicated to selling yaoi-based items stay afloat, even when Japan faced an economic crisis in the late 90s. When everything else was slowing down, yaoi continued to grow, slowly but steadily all throughout the 2000s. It never quite reached the popularity of more mainstream books, but the fans were rabid. And now that there was worldwide access, it seemed there would always be an audience of some sort looking for their next fix. All that being said, it was around this period that the debate that still runs rampant to this day began. Is yaoi homophobic? Is it creating unrealistic beauty standards for gay men, focusing on or highlighting problematic subject matter, and diminishing or even erasing women from the narrative of manga readers? This is obviously a very heavy topic, and one that I can only give my subjective opinion about. I'm not saying I'm correct, only that I can only speak to how I personally feel on the subject. There have been fantastic essays dissecting these exact sentiments in great detail, some of which you can see on the screen now as I'm talking. And if you want to watch them in full, I will have their links down below alongside everything else, but that is them and this is me. While there are elements of the genre I do enjoy, and there have been books I loved, including one of my top 5 of all time, I do think there is an element of representational appropriation found in the genre that makes it hard for some people, especially gay men, to enjoy it. Though the balance has shifted somewhat in the last 5 years or so to give gay men the chance to tell their more authentic story on a larger scale, most boys' love books are written by women for women, with a sort of voyeuristic gauge latched onto it. There are times where I'll read a story and it will feel more about the tantalizing, forbidden, or taboo love making without actually being much about the love story. Some of that, I feel, comes from the normalization of sexual harassment and sometimes even assault in Japanese culture. It doesn't really get talked about much, since it's sort of a secret shame that the government has dragged its feet on for the last 10 to 15 years, but the concept of no is sometimes taken as a suggestion, or something to be mocked rather than a definitive statement. This is the real world, mind you, not anime or manga, and if it's that prevalent in the real world, it should come as no surprise that this kind of thing is featured in a fair amount of stories, both straight and gay. When you blend that with creepy power dynamics or age gaps that can often lead to non-consensual encounters, unrealistic standards of what the male form should look like, often at the expense of or othering of those deemed not attractive, it creates these toxic tropes and stereotypes that can worm their way even into really good boys' love stories. It also seems that within the last few years, there's been a purposeful editorial decision to push boys' love instead of more traditionally feminine properties like shoujo and josei into the mainstream, with the idea that women no longer read shoujo or josei, only boys' love, and should be marketed towards as such. Even people in editorial power are throwing these kinds of statements around, going so far as to label all female readers, or otaku, fujoshi, regardless of whether they like boys' love or not. I feel like the entire fujoshi argument anyway is very anti-woman, and reeks of a point and laugh at the female trying to enter our space mentality, so I don't like the label already. But that being said, some have taken the label for themselves and are very proud of it. So if you are one of those people, more power to you. All that said, it feels like some are trying to actively remove and erase women from the narrative. Like, your demographics don't matter as much as shonen or seinen, so shut up and read your books about boys because that's all you should be reading. Maybe this is an overreaction, but it does feel that way at times, especially lately, and honestly, it's not fair. All that being said, I have noticed a trend recently, as have other scholars and researchers, that there have been a growing trend towards telling more complex and thoughtful narratives. Stories that respect their audience and display healthy portrayals of relationships between two men. The problematic tropes, much like stereotypes found in any other anime genre, do rear their ugly head from time to time, and it's up to each individual reader to decide whether they feel comfortable with them or not. But it's becoming more clear in the last 5 or so years that between the smut and uncomfortable elements are really good stories that anybody can enjoy. Stories like Seaside Stranger, Only the Flowers Know, I Hear the Sunspot, The Two Lions, and Given are all really good examples of stories that show how the genre can be done well. Admittedly, Given does have some issues that may not sit well with everyone, but as a whole, it's a fantastic story that elevates the genre. It's not just the works either. They're having real-world effects as well. Same-sex relationships are being shown as just as normal as their heteronormative counterparts, that they deserve the same kind of happiness, and that the stereotypes and othering in society that they face are slowly starting to crumble the more prevalent this media becomes. Depicting diversity in relationship lessens the gap between fiction and reality. And with that, people feel they can more easily come out or express themselves in a way they didn't think they could before, because they're finally seeing themselves, sometimes for the first time. The increase in girls' love media as well, those that don't just fetishize their relationships, but give them actual agency and help them explore their own sexuality, have helped tremendously for representation too. Lately, we've also seen manga not afraid to cover transgender, both masculine and feminine, as well as non-binary issues and topics in earnest, something that almost seems like it would have been an impossibility 5 to 10 years ago. The landscape is changing across the board, and I couldn't be happier to see it, but those topics will eventually be their own video. Even stories that don't follow traditional boys' love format, but feature stories about gay or queer men, have started to pop up as well and make real-world waves. One story in particular, the aforementioned pick in my top 5 of all time, is a story called My Brother's Husband. In it, a stay-at-home dad named Yaoi gets visited by a white man named Mike, who happens to be the husband of his recently deceased twin brother, who moved to Canada over 10 years ago. Mike wanted to learn more about his husband's family, so decided to come stay for 3 weeks with his brother-in-law. The story tackles elements of loss, of grief, acceptance, and trying to find your own inner peace, while also tackling culturally internalized homophobia, how queer people are treated in Japan, and overcoming your biases in order to grow as an individual. Though only 2 volumes, it's an amazing story written by Genjiro Takame, who is regarded in many circles as one of the most influential gay authors in all of manga, having written dozens and dozens of highly successful books. His works mostly stayed in Japan until recent years and focused heavily on hypermasculine bara-style works, with My Brother's Husband being an outlier among his usual fare, but you can see how much the topic of societal homophobia in Japan means to him. He's given tons of interviews about the subject, how to come out safely, if at all, the state of the government, and even advice for young men trying to find their way in the world, and you can see that it's something near and dear to his heart. Boys' love, girls' love, and queer media as a whole are million-dollar industries in the country, bringing in more and more money as the years go on. Yet same-sex marriage is not widely recognized, and most people in power treat queer people as something to be hidden in the bedroom but not seen. There have been baby steps, mind you. Since 2015, different municipalities have started offering partnership certificates, which, while not legally binding or protected under Japanese law, are looked at from place to place as a way for someone to see their sick partner in the hospital or get access to general means in which they could be near their partner if something were to happen. It's obviously not foolproof and has a lot of holes, but over 100 municipalities have recognized these certificates as legitimate, and even Tokyo has started making strides for more legally binding partnership certificates in the last couple of months, which, given the size of Tokyo, is a huge accomplishment. That said, it's been a constant give and take for quite some time, where one prefecture or municipality will give a couple of rights here, another will give a few rights there. Some might take some away, some might give some back. Is it constitutional? Yes, and then a year later, no. It's a constant struggle, and if Japan were to widely recognize same-sex marriage and rights, it would be the first Asian country to do so. And with growing pressure in other parts of Asia, it might be the tipping point to push things in the right direction. The history of homosexuality, of shonen ai, of yaoi and boys' love is one that is long and storied, and I've only begun to scratch the surface. Like I mentioned at the beginning, this is something that books and research articles have been written over. Multiple hour-long debates between scholars, researchers, and teachers in the field. What I've presented here is only a small portion, a small history of what's out there and available to find. And I hope that if this is a topic that interests you, you'll look at some of the links and dig a bit deeper down the rabbit hole. Maybe I'll revisit this topic again. I know I want to do a video on the history of girls' love and transgender and non-binary stories as well. But I've got a lot in the pipeline now, and wanted to at least have a starting point, some place to go from if I were to tackle this again. So, here we are. Queer media is important, and is incredibly helpful to those that are still trying to find their place in the world. Whether you enjoy boys' love or have valid reasons not to, it has left an impact on the industry that will only continue to grow. My hope is that with this, more authors will use their platform to campaign for better rights, that fans will do the same, and maybe someday we'll have a unified Japan where everyone is allowed to love. Hey everyone, Kenzie here. Hopefully you guys like the new outro / bonus video outfit that I've chosen, and yes, you will be seeing bonus videos starting in the new year, either in January or February. But yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. This is a topic that will get brought up again 100%. I want to talk about non-binary and trans rights as well as girls' love stories, but after I cover those, I definitely plan on revisiting boys' love again, but I wanted to have a baseline of where to start, so I figured I'd go here. All that being said, you can find me on every platform, mainly Twitter and Instagram, at MacLovesManga. If you like the video, be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and until then, keep reading. Thanks for watching.